Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a topic that often feels like the most precarious tightrope walk in global geopolitics. Our source material opens with a really striking image. Taiwan, nestled there in the Western Pacific, often called the powder keg of the Pacific. It's this place where history, ideology, national identity, strategic needs, they all kind of converge. Makes for a uniquely precarious balance. Yeah, it's often called the most dangerous flashpoint in the world. So, we're going to take a deep dive into these complex, often misunderstood dynamics around the Taiwan Strait. And this isn't just, abstract geopolitics, it's about the very real potential for a conflict where, as our sources state pretty clearly, nobody wins. But crucially, we're also looking at the surprising pathways toward maybe a lasting peace. Our mission today. To unpack all these intricate layers, we'll go from its deep historical roots right up to its sweeping global implications. And we really want to challenge that fatalistic idea that war is somehow inevitable here. We'll explore the specific tensions, the huge costs of conflict, and importantly, the concrete steps that could preserve peace. By the end, you should have a really thorough grasp of what's truly at stake and why it matters to you wherever you are. Okay, so given that sobering picture, let's unpack why. Why does Taiwan hold such, well, disproportionate global significance? I
Yeah.
mean, you look at Taiwan on a map, right? It's relatively small, population just over 23 million. Yet it absolutely punches far above its weight on the world stage. First off, there's its critical strategic location. Taiwan sits right in the heart of what military strategists call the first island chain. That's basically a series of U.S.-aligned territories stretching from Japan down through Okinawa, Taiwan itself, and then into the Philippines. Now, if China were to gain control over Taiwan, that would give it a critical military and naval advantage. It would allow Beijing to sort of break out of its current coastal confinement. They could then project power deep into the Pacific Ocean. And that fundamentally alters the strategic balance for the whole region, potentially challenges U.S. naval dominance, too.
Absolutely. And beyond the military side, its economic clout is, well, it's extraordinary. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, it's an absolute titan in the global tech supply chain. Our sources highlight TSMC produces over 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors. 90%. Let that sink in. These are the essential bits in, well, pretty much everything that drives modern life. Your smartphone, electric vehicles, sophisticated military hardware, cutting-edge AI systems shaping our future, all reliant on these chips. So the profound insight here is any disruption to Taiwan's chip production, conflict, blockade, whatever, it would send unimaginable shockwaves through global industries, global economies. The ripple effect would be immediate, severe, crippling countless sectors. Yeah, it's really not an exaggeration to say the world economy effectively runs on Taiwan's chips.
Right, and it's more than just chips or strategic real estate, isn't it? There's this deep symbolic resonance. Taiwan, as this vibrant democracy, it represents an existential challenge to the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. Beijing sees Taiwan as a breakaway province, right? A leftover from the Chinese Civil War, an inseparable part of its territory. For the CCP, unification is more than just a policy goal. It's framed as national sovereignty, political legitimacy, a historic mission that can't be put off forever. But here's the paradox, the interesting bit. Taiwan's very existence as a thriving democracy, where people freely elect leaders, enjoy robust civil liberties. It offers a powerful counter-narrative to Beijing's authoritarian model. It directly undermines the CCP's claim that democracy just isn't compatible with Chinese culture, or that only one-party rule works.
Yeah, what's fascinating is how Taiwan serves as both a barometer and, a battleground for U.S. China relations. It reflects these broader tensions. Democracy versus authoritarianism, open societies versus state control. The Taiwan issue, it's definitely not just between Taipei and Beijing. It's actually a core and increasingly central piece of the wider U.S.-China strategic competition. Since Washington formally recognized the PRC back in 1979, the U.S. kept up robust, though unofficial, ties with Taipei. That's under the Taiwan Relations Act, the TRA. And the TRA is crucial because it commits the U.S. to providing Taiwan with defensive arms and maintaining the capacity to resist force or coercion against the island, all while avoiding formal diplomatic recognition.
And key to that U.S. approach has been this policy called strategic ambiguity. It's been the cornerstone of U.S. policy for decades now. The basic idea is, by not explicitly committing to Taiwan's defense, the U.S. hopes to deter two things at once. First, a unilateral declaration of independence by Taiwan, and second, an invasion by China. It's a really delicate balancing act. And frankly, it's getting harder to maintain. We are seeing a significant rise in tensions. Under President Xi Jinping, China's become much more assertive, explicitly saying unification is this historic mission that can't be deferred indefinitely. So Beijing has ramped up military exercises near Taiwan, increased cyber ops, disinformation campaigns targeting Taiwan, and exerted a lot of economic and diplomatic pressure to isolate the island globally. This posture, plus, surging nationalism in China, significantly bumps up the risk of a forced reunification attempt, especially if the CCP feels peaceful options are just slipping away.
Yeah, in essence, Taiwan is this powder keg because it's where the world's most critical supply chains, this fundamental ideological clash, and the whole strategic balance of power in
Right.
Asia, it all converges right there. The stakes just couldn't be higher.
Okay, that global significance is definitely clear. But to really get this flashpoint, we need to step back in time, don't we? What are the key historical threads that have woven this really complex fabric for Taiwan? How did we get to today's precarious present?
Absolutely. To really grasp Taiwan today, you have to understand its complex, multi-layered history. It's not just a simple story of a breakaway province. Taiwan's earliest known inhabitants, they were Austronesian-speaking indigenous peoples. Their heritage predates Chinese influence by thousands of years. Then you had early European powers, the Dutch, the Spanish. They had brief presences in the 17th century. It wasn't actually until 1683 that the Qing dynasty formally annexed Taiwan. But even then, Qing rule was often pretty remote, faced frequent resistance, though Han Chinese immigration did gradually increase during that time. So this period laid some demographic groundwork, yes, but it also set a pattern of distant, often resisted governance from the mainland.
Then came a huge shift. Japanese colonization. In 1895, after the Treaty of Shimonoseki, Taiwan was ceded to Japan, became its first overseas colony. And Japan invested heavily modernizing infrastructure, public health, education. But that came alongside cultural assimilation efforts, suppression of dissent. So that era left this really complex legacy. Modernization, yes, but intertwined with colonial coercion. It's still debated, still shapes identity today.
Right. And the map got redrawn again, fundamentally. After World War II, Japan's defeated in 1945. Taiwan's placed under the administrative control of the Republic of China, led by Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang, the KMT. But KMT rule quickly soured. Widespread corruption, economic mismanagement, tragically leading to the 1947 February 28 incident, a brutal suppression. That kicked off the White Terror, this dark period of martial law, severe political repression. Then, 1949, the Chinese Civil War ends, Communist Party wins on the mainland, the KMT retreats to Taiwan, sets up Taipei as the provisional capital of the Republic of China. That single moment effectively created two governments claiming to be the legitimate rulers of all China. It set the stage for decades of diplomatic isolation, this persistent political limbo for Taiwan. And the key insight isn't just that these things happened, but how they've sort of hardened these differing one China policies, creating this diplomatic puzzle where the words mean entirely different things to each side involved.
And that historical context is absolutely vital for understanding how the One China policy evolved. It's central, but so often misunderstood. Beijing's version, the One China principle, insists the PRC is the sole legal government of China and Taiwan is an inseparable part, period. It firmly opposes any form of Taiwanese independence, demands countries cut official ties with Taipei if they want relations with Beijing.
Exactly. Now, contrast that with the Republic of China on Taiwan. Initially, they maintained their own One China stance, claimed to be the rightful government of all China, including the mainland. But that position shifted significantly as Taiwan democratized. Today, many in Taiwan interpret One China ambiguously, or just project it outright. Their priority is preserving their de facto independence without formally declaring it. And Washington's One China policy also walks this diplomatic tightrope. It acknowledges that both sides of the strait say there's one China, but crucially, the U.S. doesn't explicitly challenge PRC sovereignty over Taiwan, while at the same time maintaining robust unofficial relations with Taipei. This strategic ambiguity, it's a deliberate policy designed to deter Beijing from using force, but also discourage Taipei from declaring independence unilaterally.
And there have been several major events shaping cross-strait relations since '49. We saw the Taiwan Strait crises back in the 1950s that really solidified the U.S. commitment to Taiwan's defense. Then, in the '70s, the big U.S. PRC rapprochement that led to the PRC replacing the ROC in the UN. And U.S. formal recognition of Beijing in '79, though importantly, Congress passed the Taiwan Relations Act to maintain unofficial support for Taiwan.
Right, and that leads us up to Taiwan's own, quite remarkable, democratization. From 1987 through 2000, lifting martial law started the transition. Political parties were legalized, censorship eased. 1996, Taiwan holds its first direct presidential election. Big deal. Then in 2000, the first peaceful transfer of power to the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party. That marked a really profound internal shift. And it definitely alarmed Beijing. Then there was a period of thaw with the 1992 consensus, sort of tacit understanding. Both sides acknowledged one China but agreed to disagree on what it meant. That allowed for significant economic and cultural exchange. But under President Tsai Ing-wen, elected in 2016, tensions ratcheted up again. Her refusal to explicitly endorse the 1992 consensus led to increased pressure from Beijing. And most recently, global shifts post-2020. Things like U.S. China competition, Taiwan's really impressive handling of COVID, its critical role in semiconductors, all that has brought Taiwan renewed and much heightened international attention.
So this really complex history, it's not just a list of dates, is it? It's a living narrative, still shaping identities, shaping policy choices right now. It sets the stage perfectly for understanding these two dramatically competing visions for Chinese-speaking societies. China's redefined national dream versus Taiwan's vibrant democratic flourish. Let's maybe explore China's vision first. I mean, its economic rise over the last few decades has been truly astonishing, from a poverty-stricken, largely agrarian society to the world's second-largest economy, mostly driven by Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms back in the day. But under President Xi Jinping, China's definitely shifted from a more cautious approach to, well, a much more assertive, sometimes confrontational stance globally.
Yeah, and that transformation is deeply tied to a political and ideological narrative. The CCP frames China's rise as this national revival after a century of humiliation at the hands of foreign powers. And central to that narrative is Taiwan. In Xi Jinping's China Dream, which envisions this restored, powerful, unified China by 2049, the PRC centennial, unification with Taiwan is explicitly called the last piece of unfinished business from the Civil War. It's framed as national dignity, a critical test of CCP legitimacy, overcoming a painful historical chapter. For many Chinese citizens, this return is seen as both inevitable and necessary for China's renaissance to be complete.
And the CCP stance on unification is absolutely uncompromising, isn't it? Beijing officially considers Taiwan a renegade province, must be reunified, peacefully if possible, forcibly if necessary. That position is legally baked into China's 2005 anti-secession law, which authorizes non-peaceful means if Taiwan declares independence or if peaceful options run out. Xi Jinping himself has really intensified this rhetoric, repeatedly saying the Taiwan question cannot be passed on to future generations. His administration has ramped up military drills near the Strait, intensified efforts to isolate Taiwan diplomatically. For the CCP, failing to achieve unification would be seen, potentially, as a betrayal of China's historical mission, a sign of weakness.
Okay, now let's pivot to Taiwan's democratic flourish, because it presents such a striking contrast. Taiwan's democratic evolution is genuinely one of the most remarkable political transformations of recent times. From the KMT's authoritarian rule, the White Terror, that period of martial law lasting until 1987, Taiwan has undergone this profound shift. Lifting martial law in 87 kicked off rapid democratization, led to direct presidential elections, peaceful transfers of power. This remarkable transition really underscores the maturity, the stability of its multi-party democracy.
And it's not just about elections, right? It's about robust democratic institutions, civil liberties. Taiwan consistently ranks among the freest places in Asia, according to groups like Freedom House. It has independent branches of government, free and fair elections, often with really high voter turnout, a diverse, active media, constitutionally protected press freedom. Citizens can assemble, protest, criticize leaders without fear. And Taiwan's also been a pioneer in progressive social policies. In 2019, it became the first place in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage, a landmark decision reflecting both judicial and legislative progress. This democratic vibrancy offers, as you said, a living counterexample to Beijing's argument that authoritarianism is somehow essential for Chinese stability and prosperity.
And Taiwan's competence isn't just in governance. It's a global benchmark in public health and innovation, too. Its response to the COVID-19 pandemic was, frankly, exemplary. Early border control, masks, rigorous contact tracing, transparent communication, all achieved without major lockdowns. It was a model for crisis management. Economically, as we said, Taiwan is a tech powerhouse, the epicenter of global semiconductor production, TSMC making the most advanced chips for everything. Taiwan's also embraced digital democracy. Platforms like VTaiwan and Join allow citizens direct input with policymakers. Every election, every peaceful power transfer in Taiwan, it just underscores freedoms that are absent in the PRC.
So this drive for unification from Beijing, it's not just about sovereignty, it's really a battle for narrative dominance, for ideological legitimacy.
And perhaps most profoundly, we've witnessed the growth of distinct Taiwanese identity. While older generations might have identified more as Chinese, now nearly 70% of the population identifies exclusively as Taiwanese. especially younger people. This identity gets reinforced by the resurgence of Taiwanese Hokkien, Hakka, indigenous languages, and educational curricula that emphasize Taiwanese history, civic education, the rise of the Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP, which promotes a Taiwan-centric vision and resists unification. That's a direct reflection of this deep shift in national consciousness. So what stands out to you about these really dramatically different paths for Chinese-speaking societies? It feels like a real-time experiment in governance.
It really does. And it raises that fundamental question about governance itself. Can two fundamentally different systems coexist side by side, or is one inevitably destined to absorb the other? Taiwan's successful democracy serves as this direct ideological threat to the CCP precisely because it could inspire calls for reform on the mainland. It's a fundamental challenge to Beijing's whole narrative.
Okay, this brings us squarely to America's tightrope walk, strategic ambiguity in practice. This policy, it's been the cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy towards Taiwan for decades, and it is a truly delicate balancing act. Its origins are firmly rooted in the Cold War era. Back in 1979, the U.S. formally recognized the People's Republic of China as the sole legal government of China. That meant severing official diplomatic relations with Taiwan. But importantly, it wasn't a complete break. To ensure continued unofficial engagement with Taipei and maintain regional stability, the U.S. Congress passed the Taiwan Relations Act, the TRA, that same year, 1979.
Right. And the TRA committed the U.S. to providing Taiwan with defensive arms and maintaining the capacity to resist any use of force against the island. It authorized commercial and cultural relations through the American Institute in Taiwan, AIT, which functions as a de facto embassy. But critically, the TRA did not explicitly state whether the U.S. would intervene militarily if there was an invasion. This intentional vagueness, this is strategic ambiguity. It was designed to deter both Beijing from attacking and Taipei from unilaterally declaring independence. It's a calculated policy, meant to keep the peace by keeping both sides guessing about the true extent of America's commitment.
And this policy of strategic ambiguity has been remarkably consistent across different administrations. Reagan right through Obama, we saw it tested, didn't we, during the third Taiwan Strait crisis in 95-96. China conducted missile tests near Taiwan, and the U.S. responded by deploying aircraft carrier battle groups, a clear signal of resolve.
Yes, but recent U.S. actions, particularly under Presidents Trump and Biden, they suggest a discernible tilt. Some might even call it a move towards strategic clarity. Okay. We've seen a definite increase in U.S. support, a surge in arms sales to Taiwan to boost its self-defense, more high-profile diplomatic engagements like House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit in 2022, which of course drew furious Chinese military drills around Taiwan. President Biden himself has made occasional sort of off-the-cuff remarks suggesting military intervention, and even though officials usually walk those back, they've certainly raised questions about a potential shift away from ambiguity.
But this increased U.S. involvement, this potential tilt towards clarity, it carries significant risks and limits too, doesn't it? Some critics argue ambiguity is actually making things more dangerous now, that it's outdated. What's the counter argument? Why might it still be the best approach?
That's a really crucial question. One major concern is definitely provoking Beijing. China's made its red line very clear. Any move towards Taiwanese independence or de facto recognition by the U.S. is unacceptable. So increased American support, symbolic or material, risks aggressive countermeasures from Beijing. That's one risk. There's also the risk of strategic overextension for the U.S., which already faces growing demands globally. Committing to defend Taiwan militarily, that would require immense resources, direct confrontation with a nuclear-armed peer, especially given China's A2AD, anti-access area denial capabilities. And furthermore, if U.S. signals become too explicit, they might actually embolden pro-independence forces in Taiwan, encourage them to take steps that cross Beijing's red lines, destabilizing the delicate status quo. And of course, the economic fallout of any conflict would just be catastrophic, disrupting global supply chains, especially semiconductors.
So, okay, while strategic ambiguity is imperfect, why does it maybe continue to serve as a kind of diplomatic safety valve in today's heightened environment?
Well, what's fascinating is that despite all the criticisms, many analysts still argue strategic ambiguity remains the best available policy, the least bad option, perhaps. It offers flexibility, it deters both sides from taking unilateral action, and it buys crucial time for diplomacy, for deterrence building. In a region where clarity could, ironically, lead to catastrophe, maybe by removing deterrence uncertainty or by emboldening one side, too much ambiguity might still be the most strategic choice. But for it to work, it has to remain credible, right? China has to believe the U.S. might respond, and Taiwan has to believe it doesn't have a blank check from the U.S.
As we talk about these risks, it brings us to the most sobering part of our deep dive. The catastrophic cost of a war over Taiwan. It truly would be a war nobody wins. For decades, the idea of a hot war between the U.S. and China seemed, well, remote. Strategic ambiguity, economic interdependence. They created this fragile balance. But that balance is definitely fraying now. As Beijing gets more assertive and Washington becomes more vocal supporting Taiwan's autonomy, the risks of miscalculation are rising sharply. Military exercises around Taiwan are more frequent, more aggressive, and the lines between diplomacy, deterrence, and outright provocation are getting increasingly blurred. In this kind of volatile environment, even a minor incident, an accidental collision at sea, a misinterpreted radar signal, maybe a rogue actor, could ignite a much broader confrontation. One that our sources say would be extremely difficult to contain.
Yeah, the military nightmare for everyone involved would be immense. For Taiwan, obviously it's the immediate battleground, massive civilian casualties, protracted, bloody urban warfare, and amphibious invasion, described as one of the most complex and dangerous military operations imaginable, would face Taiwan's rugged coastline, its determined defense. For China, even the successful invasion would be incredibly costly, incredibly risky, could lead to domestic instability, a long occupation with fierce resistance. For the U.S. and its allies, like Japan, Australia, the logistical challenges would be huge. U.S. bases in the region would become immediate targets. This could easily escalate. Regional war, maybe even global, compounded by cyber attacks, hybrid tactics.
And then there's the terrifying nuclear overhang. Both China and the U.S. have nuclear weapons. That introduces this dangerous layer of uncertainty. A conventional war that goes badly for either side could lead to thinking about tactical nuclear options, with the horrifying possibility of accidental launches or public pressure overriding rational decision-making in a crisis.
Absolutely. And beyond the immediate military and nuclear risks, the economic catastrophe would be unprecedented. Taiwan is the epicenter of the global semiconductor industry. A halt in production. That causes cascading failures across all industries depending on high-end chips, consumer electronics, automotive, aerospace, defense, everything. Remember, this isn't just a disruption. It's a shutdown of a foundational global industry. Plus, over half of global container traffic passes through the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea. Any disruption paralyzes international shipping, skyrockets energy prices. Financial markets would react with panic, crashes, investment drying up, volatile currencies, potentially a global depression. The war would also accelerate this technological decoupling we hear about. Halt cross-border research, collapse supply chains, potentially reverse decades of innovation.
And the human, environmental, diplomatic costs. Equally chilling. Millions displaced, aid systems totally overwhelmed, basic services collapsed, environmentally bombing industrial sites could release toxic chemicals. Diplomatically, international bodies like the UN, the WTO, paralyzed. Countries forced to pick sides, a new era of fragmentation. Ultimately, it's described as a generation lost. Young people conscripted, education and career plans shattered, a world defined by borders, suspicion, fear. It sounds truly, truly apocalyptic. Is there really no way out of this? Is war somehow, as some people suggest, just inevitable?
Well, that raises the really important question, doesn't it? Can human agency, can rational restraint actually overcome such deep-seated tensions? The narrative that war is inevitable over Taiwan is pervasive. You hear it a lot. It's often rooted in historical analogies, comparisons to World War I or the Thucydides trap, where rising and established powers supposedly always clash. There's also the argument about ideological incompatibility, democracies versus authoritarian regimes. Combine that with rapid military modernization, domestic political pressures. However, while these assumptions have elements of truth, our sources argue they exaggerate risk and underestimate the capacity of states to choose alternatives, unquote. And that fosters a dangerous sense of defeatism.
That's such a crucial point. War is a choice, not a destiny. Because states aren't automatons, right? They're governed by people, people capable of rational calculation, of adaptation. And in the case of Taiwan, all three main stakeholders, China, the U.S., Taiwan, they all have much to lose and little to gain from open conflict. I don't know. Take China's calculus. An invasion is militarily risky, economically ruinous, diplomatically isolating. The CCP's legitimacy relies heavily on continued economic growth, social stability. Both would be shattered by war. And China does have a long tradition of strategic patience, despite current rhetoric.
Exactly. Similarly, America's interests prioritize preventing a war with a nuclear peer. And its strategic ambiguity policy is precisely designed to deter both a declaration of independence and a Chinese invasion, to preserve peace and its alliances in the Indo-Pacific. And for Taiwan's self-interest, its leaders, its public, consistently prioritize maintaining the status quo over provoking conflict. They know a formal declaration of independence would likely invite war, a scenario Taiwan's democracy is certainly not eager to embrace. This shared understanding, even if it's unspoken, that war is just too costly, that creates essential space for diplomacy.
And history is actually full of examples where seemingly irreconcilable differences were managed without full-scale war. Think about the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962. The world stood on the absolute brink of nuclear war. Publicly, the U.S. and the Soviet Union seemed unyielding. But behind the scenes, secret diplomacy, back-channel negotiations, they prevailed, allowed both sides to de-escalate while saving face, led to the famous hotline. Another example, the U.S. China rapprochement in '72. Despite decades of ideological hostility, the U.S. and PRC found common ground. Mutual concern about Soviet power led to Nixon's groundbreaking visit to Beijing.
And we've seen this play out in other intense regional rivalries, too. The India-Pakistan crises, 2001-2002, again in 2019. Despite major provocations, both nuclear-armed rivals, they avoided full-scale war through diplomacy, international mediation, or look at Cold War deterrence and dialogue. For nearly 5 decades, the U.S. and Soviet Union avoided direct conflict despite numerous flashpoints. They maintained stability through arms control agreements, like SALT and START, even cultural exchanges. These examples show that institutionalized communication channels, even amidst deep mistrust, can reduce misunderstanding, can create room for negotiation.
So if war isn't inevitable, what concrete steps can actually be taken? Our sources highlight several mechanisms for peace. One key area is confidence-building measures, CBMs. These are basically tools to reduce mistrust, prevent accidental escalation. Could involve things like military hotlines between Beijing, Taipei, and Washington, notification of military exercises, mutual agreements on rules of engagement in those overlapping air defense zones, establishing crisis management teams empowered to communicate in real time. Even things like joint humanitarian or environmental cooperation coordinating disaster relief, marine conservation projects could be low-risk first steps.
Another critical pathway is through economic engagement, recognizing shared prosperity as a potential foundation. While economics has sometimes been a battleground, it can also be a bridge. This could involve normalizing trade relations, maybe reviving, expanding cross-strait economic agreements to include things like digital trade, green tech, promoting business-to-business partnerships in tech, biotech, or even facilitating exchange programs for young entrepreneurs, build trust, build shared stakes. The key, though, is for Taiwan to selectively engage welcome trade without political strings attached, and for China to reassure Taiwan that economic ties won't be weaponized for political concessions.
And we definitely can't overlook cultural and academic exchange. These seem critical for fostering empathy, dismantling stereotypes, humanizing the other. They can uniquely reach across ideological lines. We're talking about funding joint research between Chinese and Taiwanese universities on topics like public health, climate science, creating scholarships, supporting academic forums, culturally, organizing arts festivals, literature translation programs, encouraging film or music collaborations. These can reflect shared cultural roots while also celebrating diversity. People-to-people diplomacy, student, teacher, journalist exchanges, even sports events can build understanding. And these new areas of shared interest, public health cooperation on pandemics, climate change collaboration on green tech, dialogues on tech and cyber ethics like AI governance, they offer fertile ground for building habits of collaboration without getting bogged down in those intractable sovereignty disputes. So, okay, it sounds like there are concrete steps, not just wishful thinking. But what about China's long-standing one country, two systems proposal, the one they've offered to Taiwan?
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, history really does show that war is a political choice, not some predetermined destiny. The path ahead lies in actively choosing peace. And regarding one country, two systems, it's crucial to understand its genesis. It was Deng Xiaoping's innovative formula back in the 1980s, designed for Hong Kong and Macau, right, to let them keep their distinct systems under Chinese sovereignty after their return. And Beijing initially even offered Taiwan more generous terms, potentially allowing it to keep its own military, elect its leaders, provided it acknowledged the PRC as the sole legitimate government of China.
But that model has just dramatically unraveled in Hong Kong, hasn't it? And that's profoundly shaped Taiwan's view. After the '97 handover, Hong Kong initially seemed to enjoy its autonomy. But the unraveling really accelerated. Attempts to introduce controversial legislation leading to mass protests, and it culminated in the imposition of the 2020 National Security Law. That law effectively erased Hong Kong's autonomy, criminalized dissent, jailed opposition leaders, curtailed civil liberties, led international observers to say Beijing violated the spirit of the joint declaration. That whole breakdown served as a stark, immediate cautionary tale for Taiwan.
And Taiwan's response has just been a resounding rejection of one country, two systems. Even before the Hong Kong crisis, Taiwanese public opinion consistently rejected unification under any framework. Support stayed in the low single digits. A growing majority consistently prefers either maintaining the status quo or moving towards formal independence. President Tsai Ing-wen's explicit rejection of one country, two systems in her 2020 re-election campaign, where she directly cited Hong Kong as proof Beijing couldn't be trusted. That solidified this consensus. Her electoral victory, the largest since 1996, clearly showed the depth of public opposition to that model.
So why exactly can one country, two systems just not work for Taiwan? It feels like a fundamental incompatibility.
It really is, precisely. There are several core reasons why that framework is fundamentally unviable for Taiwan. First, Taiwan has a fully functioning democracy, regular elections, independent judiciary, free press. Accepting one country, two systems would mean ceding sovereignty to an authoritarian regime, effectively dismantling those institutions. Second, as we discussed, a distinct Taiwanese identity has emerged, reinforced by language, culture, education, shared historical experience. The population largely sees Taiwan as a separate country now. Third, huge security concerns. Taiwan has its own military. Subsuming it into a PRC-led system means dismantling its armed forces. That's unacceptable to most Taiwanese. Fourth, the credibility crisis from Hong Kong is just undeniable. Beijing's actions there are a clear warning. And finally, generational shifts. Younger Taiwanese are even more resistant to unification. They grew up in a democratic society, no personal ties to the mainland. The Chinese Civil War's ancient history to them.
Okay, given that strong rejection, could a new political framework ever be negotiated? Our sources do explore some theoretical alternatives. They suggest models like maybe a confederation structure, similar to the EU, where two sovereign entities cooperate on specific issues without giving up political independence. Another possibility mentioned is sovereign dual recognition or treaty-based coexistence, where both sides agree to, refrain from hostile actions, maintain informal relations, maybe negotiate treaties on specific areas like fisheries or disaster response without resolving the big sovereignty question.
Yes, but these alternatives face, as the sources put it, enormous political and ideological barriers. Beijing's absolute insistence on the one China principle and Taiwan's equally unwavering unwillingness to accept subordination. They remain mutually exclusive right now. Until both sides show much greater flexibility, a real willingness to compromise, even these creative solutions will struggle to gain traction. The international community, especially the U.S., plays a crucial role here, sticking to its one China policy while supporting Taiwan's defense. Third-party mediation from neutral actors could be explored, maybe facilitate dialogue, but that requires genuine willingness from both Beijing and Taipei to engage in good faith. Multilateralism, too, things like shared investment in regional trade deals or climate cooperation, could create a broader context for cross-strait coexistence eventually.
So perhaps, for the time being at least, preserving the status quo is actually the most pragmatic strength. It's a complex arrangement, definitely, but it has functioned remarkably well, kept the peace for over 7 decades. The status quo basically means Taiwan governs itself as a de facto independent state, own constitution, own military. Beijing claims Taiwan, insists on eventual unification. The U.S. and most countries don't formally recognize Taiwan but maintain robust informal relations. And strategic ambiguity prevails, preventing unilateral changes like a declaration of independence or a military invasion. This arrangement is inherently fragile, contradictory even, yet it has preserved peace, allowed for Taiwan's democratic evolution, its economic growth.
The benefits of strategic patience in this context are pretty substantial when you think about it. First, it avoids catastrophic war, prevents immense human and material costs. Second, it allows for internal evolution within both Taiwan and China. Thus, political generational shifts shape future identities and policies organically. Third, it sustains global economic stability, Taiwan being that linchpin for semiconductors, cross-strait trade being vital regionally. Fourth, it facilitates incremental engagement, provides a platform for both sides to engage without forcing these huge existential decisions. And fifth, it allows for nuanced policymaking, avoiding zero-sum politics.
And the danger of forcing change is just immense, right? A unilateral declaration of independence by Taiwan almost certainly provokes military retaliation from Beijing under their anti-secession law and likely isolates Taiwan diplomatically. Conversely, forced unification by China, catastrophic. Massive civilian casualties, long-term resistance, diplomatic coercion, or formal recognition by major powers. That would also trigger severe crises. Even rapid constitutional changes in Taiwan could be read as moves towards formal independence, limiting diplomatic room to maneuver.
Right. And strategic ambiguity, despite all its critics, has proven itself as a key peacekeeping mechanism here. By not committing to defend Taiwan outright, but also not ruling it out, it simultaneously deters China from using force by signaling potential consequences, and discourages Taiwan from taking steps that might provoke conflict. This vagueness acts as a kind of constraint on hasty decision-making. preserves vital flexibility for diplomatic engagement. Plus, the domestic realities in both Taiwan and China also reinforce the status quo. Public opinion polls in Taiwan consistently show the majority prefer maintaining the status quo indefinitely, and the CCP faces significant internal challenges that make a war over Taiwan really undesirable. It would destabilize its legitimacy, its modernization agenda.
And crucially, there's broad international endorsement of the status quo, isn't there? Successive U.S. presidents have upheld the One China policy while supporting Taiwan's self-defense, reaffirming support for the status quo. The European Union, Japan, South Korea, Australia, they all echo similar positions, opposing unilateral changes, advocating peaceful resolution. The global economic community businesses, trade groups, markets, they strongly advocate for stability. They know disruption in the Strait would collapse investor confidence, supply chains. Even the ethical case for patience is compelling. It avoids unthinkable human suffering, respects Taiwan's democratic choice, defends the principle of civilizational coexistence, proving pluralism is possible. It really seems like this complex dance where holding steady might actually be the most courageous move. But it's not a passive stance, is it? It requires work.
Absolutely. What's fascinating here is that while it's unsatisfying for both sides, the status quo is currently, as one source puts it, preferable to the instability and destruction that forced unification would bring, end quote. But it requires active maintenance, constant vigilance. That means robust deterrence. Taiwan maintaining credible defense, allies supporting that deterrence without escalating things. It demands constructive diplomacy, keeping quiet, informal channels open, allowing regional partners to play facilitative roles. Economic resilience is key, Taiwan diversifying ties to reduce vulnerability, China avoiding weaponizing trade. Crisis management protocols are vital for swift de-escalation if something happens. And public education on the stakes involved, promoting dialogue, empathy. That's essential too. Living with ambiguity is uncomfortable, yes, but necessary. It buys time to adapt, avoid binary traps. Makes it a kind of triumph of restraint that preserves a fragile but incredibly precious peace.
It's so clear that the world isn't just watching. It has a profound stake in the outcome. Which brings us to the role of global stakeholders, this idea of a multipolar shield for peace. The security and stability of the Taiwan Strait isn't just regional, it's truly a global concern. Let's look at Japan first, arguably the most directly affected third-party stakeholder. Geographically, Japan's southwestern islands are perilously close to Taiwan. Any conflict would likely spill over. Economically, Japan imports over 90% of its energy through sea lanes near Taiwan, relies heavily on Taiwan for high-end semiconductors. Japanese leaders have increasingly voiced concerns, participated in joint naval drills, signaling their growing alarm.
Then you've got ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. This 10-member regional bloc really emphasizes neutrality, economic cooperation, conflict prevention. ASEAN members have deep economic and cultural ties with both China, its largest trading partner, and Taiwan, a significant investor. Any disruption in cross-strait trade would severely damage ASEAN economies. While they officially adhere to the One China policy, they maintain robust informal ties with Taiwan, support its participation in forums like APEC. ASEAN's experience hosting peace dialogues positions it as a potential neutral platform for confidence-building talks, underscores their desire to avoid getting entangled in a U.S. China conflict.
Australia also plays this complex role, doesn't it? A middle power navigating these strategic tensions. As a member of the ANZ-US Treaty, participant in the Quad, Australia is expected to support U.S. strategic interests in the Indo-Pacific. Its defense white papers increasingly highlight the Taiwan Strait as a potential flashpoint. But economically, China remains Australia's largest trading partner. So while Canberra supports Taiwan's inclusion in multilateral forums, it avoids directly endorsing Taiwanese independence, reflects that delicate balancing act.
And the European Union. Geographically distant, yes, but it's emerged as a significant normative actor. The EU is Taiwan's fourth largest trading partner, heavily dependent on Taiwan's critical semiconductors. As a champion of democratic values, the EU increasingly voices support for Taiwan's international participation. European countries pursue what they call diplomatic diversification. We saw that example with Lithuania allowing a Taiwanese representative office. Drew backlash from Beijing, sure, but signaled increasing European resolve. The EU issues joint declarations urging restraint, and its civil society actively builds partnerships with Taiwanese counterparts.
And all these regional and international players converge around the enormous stake the global economy has in peace in the Taiwan Strait. As we highlighted earlier, that massive global reliance on Taiwan's advanced semiconductor production, a halt would cause cascading failures worldwide. Beyond that, over 50% of global container traffic passes through waters near Taiwan. Conflict or blockade paralyzes global shipping, skyrockets costs. A crisis triggers massive capital flight, market volatility, energy price spikes globally. It's truly a global economic linchpin.
In this interconnectedness, it generates powerful international pressure for de-escalation. You see diplomatic declarations from groups like the G7, the EU, consistently calling for peace and stability, opposing unilateral changes. Parliamentary diplomacy legislators from multiple countries visiting Taiwan signals global scrutiny and support. Military transparency through freedom of navigation operations, FONLPs, allied exercises, reinforces deterrence without direct confrontation. Furthermore, the private sector, multinational companies, industry groups, they lobby governments to stabilize relations, protect supply chains, and civil society mobilization, NGOs, academic institutions, advocates for peace building, raises awareness of Taiwan's democratic survival. This chorus of international voices, diverse, persistent, principled, represents the best hope for ensuring the Taiwan Strait remains a channel of commerce and communication, not a theater of war.
As we start to wrap up this deep dive, it feels vital to reaffirm that peace in the Taiwan Strait isn't just possible, it's infinitely preferable. Our sources remind us the Strait has avoided full-scale war for over 7 decades now. That's a testament to careful diplomacy, restraint by leaders on all sides, and crucial international support for maintaining that fragile status quo. This legacy proves peace is a policy choice, not some fantasy. That coexistence is possible even in the most sensitive conflicts when there's political will.
And the human face of peace is perhaps the most compelling argument of all. A war over Taiwan would inflict just unthinkable suffering on ordinary people. Taiwanese civilians, Chinese soldiers, American military families, communities across East Asia and beyond. Peace means preserving lives, protecting prosperity, upholding dignity for everyone. Every single day without war is a profound victory. For students finishing degrees, for families staying whole, for children growing up with hope instead of trauma. Peace isn't some abstract concept. It's lived in the quiet routines of daily life.
East Asia really does stand at a historic crossroads right now. One path leads toward increased polarization and militarization, confrontation, potentially devastating consequences. The other path, though, leads to a shared future, shaped by cooperation, mutual respect, inclusive development. Both China and Taiwan, and indeed the whole region, have so much to gain from peace. China can continue its economic modernization, enhance its global leadership. Taiwan can deepen its vibrant democracy, expand its tech innovation, engage the world on its own terms. And East Asia as a whole can build new regional institutions, tackle critical global challenges like climate change, pandemics, lead the global autonomy. Conflict would derail all those aspirations. Cooperation can make them real.
Yet a vision for a cooperative East Asia could be grounded in several guiding principles. Mutual recognition of reality, acknowledging both China and Taiwan exist as functioning societies with legitimate, if differing, aspirations, without requiring either side to erase their differences. Functional cooperation without political preconditions, addressing shared challenges like pandemics, cyber threats together. Gradually normalizing interaction, step-by-step engagement, like student exchanges or joint climate projects, can build trust over time. Multilateral engagement and regionalism, fostering new institutions that include both Taiwan and China in depoliticized roles, maybe modeled on successful blocs like ASEAN or the EU. This collective approach could brand peace as the very foundation of the region's identity.
The responsibility to pursue peace, it falls squarely on the shoulders of leaders, doesn't it? Taipei, Beijing, Washington, Tokyo, Brussels, Canberra, everywhere. It requires immense political courage, not to rally nationalist sentiments, but to actually risk dialogue, explore alternatives. For Beijing, peace requires confidence, not insecurity. A rising China can afford to be magnanimous, patient. For Taipei, peace requires wisdom, not provocation. Taiwan's democratic resilience is strengthened by global engagement, smart diplomacy. And for Washington and its allies, peace requires clarity and consistency, balancing support for Taiwan's autonomy with efforts to avoid militarization and escalation. Global stakeholders need to actively invest in cross-strait stability as a shared, profound interest.
And the power of diplomacy and dialogue, that's the ultimate tool. Diplomacy is never a sign of weakness. It's the only civilized means we have of resolving differences without bloodshed. In the Taiwan Strait, diplomacy has to operate on multiple levels. Formal government-to-government talks, even if unofficial, must be maintained, expanded. Track 2 and Track 1.5 dialogues involving scholars, retired officials can create crucial space for informal, innovative problem solving when public politics get too heated. Back-channel communications are vital for quiet diplomacy, and people-to-people exchanges cultural, educational, business essential for cultivating understanding, reducing that dehumanization of the other.
De-escalation, too, is a global imperative. It's the art of managing risk, protecting global order. To de-escalate tensions, all sides must reaffirm their commitment to peaceful resolution. Military activity around Taiwan needs to be dialed back with greater transparency, communication. Strategic ambiguity must be preserved, not abandoned for short-term political gain. Third-party actors have to resist instrumentalizing Taiwan as just a pawn in great power competition. And the media has a crucial role responsible fact-based reporting, avoiding sensationalism that only fuels conflict.
Peace, in essence, is a strategic asset. It's not just the absence of war. It's an environment where nations can thrive, citizens can dream, ideas can flourish. In the Taiwan Strait, peace allows global supply chains to function, enables collaboration on cutting-edge tech like AI and clean energy. It fosters cultural and educational exchange, preserves the rich biodiversity of East Asian waters. Ultimately, it allows for a shared narrative of a modern Asia rising together, rather than tragically tearing itself apart. And beyond strategy and economics, there's a profound moral imperative here. We owe it to future generations to resolve our differences through dialogue, not destruction. A war in the Taiwan Strait would be a tragedy of global proportions, scarring the conscience of humanity. Choosing peace is choosing life, dignity, decency. It affirms that no dispute, no ambition, no ideology is worth the slaughter of innocents and the ruin of nations.
As we close this deep dive, we come back to that most basic human instinct, the desire to live in peace. The Taiwan Strait does not have to be the Sarajevo of the 21st century. It can be a powerful symbol of what diplomacy, empathy, and restraint can achieve. Peace is not a fantasy. It is a policy choice. It is a process. It is a discipline. And most of all, it is worth every single ounce of effort. The future of East Asia, and perhaps the world, depends on it. Because in the end, peace is not just possible. It is a peace worth pursuing.